mai, haere mai. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Rosalind McIntosh from the United Nations Association, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here this evening and to welcome our distinguished panelists. So our topic tonight is how to expand and empower civil society's voice on the future of Aotearoa. And the reason for this meeting is that every meeting I've gone to in the last year or so, I've heard things like citizens need to have a stronger voice and more unified action. We need to listen better, to hear the voice of diversity and the voice of lived experience on the issues we're looking at. We need to be consulted more, and we need to be better educated in New Zealand about the issues that we're facing, and a lot more like that. So our question is, how do we find a unified voice and action on difficult issues when we are conflicted between ourselves? So I have been very fortunate in my peacekeeping work to experience some movingly successful outcomes from difficult conversations using particular kinds of procedures. And so I brought together our panel of people knowledgeable on this subject so we can learn and explore what procedures work well and hear some successful examples of it working well. And I note that the procedures we're using this evening come from the Western tertiary education model. That's how we're discussing this evening. We don't have to do it that way. We can use other procedures. For example, next time we meet, we could be on the shore of the great harbour of Tara. We could have a nice warm fire we're sitting around to warm ourselves with. There would be the lapping of water and maybe fresh water sounds from a stream running by. There would be children playing in the distance. There would be perhaps the sound of the kaka in the evening. Have you noticed how gentle they are when they call to each other in the evening? And we would have the great cosmos above us enfolding around. And as it gets darker and the stars come out, maybe we would hear a ruuru in the deep forest calling to its mate across the headland. And in that setting, we would have different procedures from what we're going to do tonight. And we might have different reasons for acting. But whatever our procedures and whatever our reasons are for acting, we do need to act right now. It's an urgent situation in the world as a whole in New Zealand. It's becoming increasingly clear to us that there is uncertainty and division in our human social structures, in the climate, and in the functioning of the natural world on which all life, including our own, depends. So I'll just say a few words on how the SDGs link into these processes for talking to each other. Now, a gentleman called Richard Curtis, I'm quoting him, he said, "The SDGs are the glorious glue for bringing us together to take the quantum leap in consciousness and action that is required now." And Richard Curtis was talking at the opening address of the United Nations High-Level Forum in New York 2 months ago. That was about the SDGs, and our government presented there New Zealand's 4 years of progress on the SDGs to the international community. And they presented as part of that the very splendid work they have done on the Living Standards Framework and on well-being. So that's linked intimately with the SDGs. So the glorious glue of the SDGs comes from the values that are at the basis of it, and those values are respect, inclusion, and collaboration, and that needs to manifest in all aspects of it. Now, the strategy of the SDGs has 2 prongs. The first one is that in any problem, multiple underlying causes are assessed and addressed together. So in that way, we build a resilient and broad safety net rather than a temporary prop for the problem we're dealing with. That is what sustainability is about. And the second strategy for the SDGs is that the diversity of our community must be consulted on all aspects of government action about this. So we can use the creativity and the experience of New Zealand if we have the tools to bring them together, to allow them to be heard, and to support the ones that are following the values of the SDGs, which are respect, inclusion, and collaboration. And many of you will say, well, there's a lot going on in New Zealand. We're doing a lot about sustainability, and that is wonderful, and I think it's true. You might say there's a lot of consultation going on as well. But our usual models of consultation are top-down governance. We have an authority, which could be the government, and it's consulting with this person and that organisation, all like that. They collect the response, tell the story, and make the decisions. What's missing in that is citizens talking with each other, learning from each other, listening and finding empathy of our common humanity, and being energised by one another to act in the interests of everyone. And such citizen interaction, of course, quite simply is the basis of genuine functioning democracy. And my experience is that the human mind takes much pleasure in working in this way with others. So if you haven't read Max Rashbrook's book on governance for the public good, I recommend that you do so immediately. And Max is an academic here at the Institute for Governance and Policy Studies and has twin interests in economic inequality and open government. Correct me, Max, if I'm not all right. And he's an author and an international quality journalist. His writing, when you read it, flows easily and is very informative on these most important of topics. I'll hand over to you, Max. Thank you.
We deliberated.
Yeah.
And we together, maybe I should proceed, Max, given the nature of our what we're sharing.
Very good.
But also,
Okay.
Kura,
I'll just turn that around and I'll introduce you to Emily. We're giving Kura the last word.
Okay, all right.
Okay, so Emily Beausoleil, we're very honoured to have her here. She is a lecturer in political science at Victoria University. She is a Marsden Fastart Fellow with the Royal Society of New Zealand. And her topic is Hearing the Difference, New Strategies for Listening in Contemporary Politics. Among her research interests are democratic engagement in diverse societies, artistic strategies to facilitate listening in politics, post-colonial theory and active citizens. Thank you, Emily. If you might want to add to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction, and also to set the stage like that, Roz. That's really beautiful. I hope you'll forgive me. Max and I worked on this work before, or relatedly alongside one another, and we felt, especially as an academic who often we say, do as I say, not as I do, Max is going to come in too and sort of situate us more in the New Zealand context and talk about also experimentations for thinking what it would be to bring deliberation more into this country. So I'm going to set us up for that. So if you'll forgive us for doing it this way. I'm going to just begin this. There we are. Ko Emily Beausoleil toko ingoa no Hakaroa ahau, Vancouver, BC. Ko te whenua o Hakaroa no te iwi Coast Salish. That's the land of the Coast Salish people, so that's where I was brought up. I'm going to share a little bit with you about what deliberation is, and I'm going to start that by talking about what it's not. So you might remember this already proves my case, right? Like bad decisions made without deliberation. So of these, remember there were 10,292 submissions. People who could, again, we think this is broadly democratic. You put up your idea, people can look at them, and then we vote on them, right? That's what we think democracy is. So we get 39 when one was taken down for copyright purposes, and then the committee The flag panel was decided amongst them. They deliberated amongst themselves. Maybe they came up with these, mainly informed by the voting, like aggregating which one got the most votes. They actually, believe it or not, Kyle Lockwood would have had more of the top 4 if they hadn't intervened, which is interesting to me. But of course, what do you see here? You don't see a lot of choice, right? And this was the feeling around this. With these final decisions, a crew generated by the public, chosen by the public, that like Rowan Simpson, who wrote an open letter to John Key, the feeling was we have no choice at all, actually. And he in this open letter posited the Red Peak. Do you remember that? So the Red Peak, which ultimately got 50,000 names signed to it, to the petition saying we should put this forward as a 5th option. He put in this letter, I wasn't actually swayed. I didn't see the value of the Red Peak as an option, but I got more information. I changed my mind. And let me tell you the good reasons why this flag should win. And those reasons, talking about how well it sits with other flags, how easy it is to draw, the meaning of the symbolism, they swayed 50,000 people to sign up, and it ultimately was added to that top choice, right? This, I feel, embodies something really precise about both the limits of many of the mechanisms we use to have voice and make decisions, and also the promise of deliberation, how important the chance to give and hear good reasons is to be able to make better decisions. Most of the mechanisms we have, now that's to say, in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there are long-held traditions of protocols and practices from a Maori worldview, from Maori practice, that do very much embody principles of speaking and listening, kanohi ki te kanohi. But they, at the level of, say, parliamentary process, at the level of government politics, especially at the national level, we mainly rely on unidirectional, mass, one-hit wonder kind of mechanisms. The opinion poll, referenda, voting. And when deliberation happens, it's usually allocated to the rare moment of, say, an expert advisory group, right? Or a select committee. So certain people are said to be expert enough to be able to actually consider those reasons together. And that embodies something of what's called an aggregative approach to politics. And those measures, like this referendum, demonstrate an idea that we come to our best decisions when we just add up by a majority vote, right? We don't actually consider why, we don't deliberate amongst one another, but we can come to our decisions by adding up how we already feel about an issue. That's embodied in the flag referendum. Now, deliberation, what we're going to talk about today, has very different premises. It starts from such a different place. And that's the idea that our views, our positions, are not fully formed, nor are they fixed. In fact, we develop how we really feel about a given issue in light of being able to be refined and enhanced by learning from a broader world than our own. That's the deliberative difference of where we start from. And this takes at its heart, too, a different idea of legitimacy. So decisions are good, are justified, if we have been able to have a sense that they have been explained and backed up by good reasons. That's what makes them legitimate. That they have had to give an account. We have had to give an account for why we feel the way we feel and consider those meaningfully. So this is very different than, say, negotiation, which takes as its basic beginning that we're just in a win-lose, right? Like I'm trying to get what I can, get what's mine as much as possible. Similarly with activism and advocacy, where often it's like, I want to see as much as I can get to hear, as much as possible. Similarly, it's not very different from protest, which is out on the streets often. Deliberation happens, it needs protest actually often to be able to move to a point where we're willing to come to the table, but deliberation can happen the moment we're able to come to the table. So deliberation is different than all of these other ways of giving voice, say. And I want to define 3 big differences too in how it plays out, because it orients us too in a particular way. One, it's always about issues that are public in some way. So what is something we collectively have as an issue? What do we need to do about something that's an issue that we hold in common? 2, very differently than, say, negotiation, activism, or like debate, the way we typically think about it, or politics sometimes, parliamentary politics, it's adversarial. This is very much oriented around how can we come to the right decision I have strong interests. I want certain things. Like for me and my family, I have a particular view. But we come together as a way to pool those views to come to what we can collectively agree upon is the right decision for us. That's the difference there in terms of what we seek. And 3, there are 4 civic norms that shape how we do that work. And everything in terms of deliberation is structured to help us embody those norms through the process. So these are often, they require facilitators, they require a lot of careful crafting, but we're going to see countless examples that we can draw from, proliferation of thousands of amazing instances around the world of people using this, small scale, large scale, difficult, the most difficult and vexed complex issues. So, but this, I want you to us hear a bit about the heart of it. What's at the heart of this? What are the norms that are orienting us in this work? The 4 norms are inclusion, equality, publicity, and reasonableness. So the very first one is the principle of inclusion. And this is the idea that a decision is legitimate if we can have all those who are affected by that decision have a say in having their view heard and being able to help decide what we come to. And that's really known as also the democratic principle, right? This idea that if you are affected by an issue, you also should have a say in what that decision is that we come to together if it affects our lives. And this links it very closely to the idea of democracy as popular sovereignty, that we, the people, should be able to govern what affects us in our lives. I'm going to show you just a hint at some of the diversity of forms of deliberation. Here's an incredibly, I find very inspiring, all through India, thousands and thousands of villages at the village level decide for that village what is important to them, and that is fed up to the national budget level. So we can talk about scale. There's no limit for the forms these can take. The second principle is the principle of equality. And this doesn't just mean being in the room. It means that, and that's that principle of inclusion, it means that you actually have an equal say, that we have an equal hearing in being able to be put in dialogue with all the other ways that there are to hear and to experience and to think about a given issue. So you need to have equal chance to express your view, your experience, but also have an equal opportunity to criticize and question the perspectives of others, the positions of others. Again, like give me an account, be accountable to me also. And 3, that you have an equal say in shaping the decision that ends up coming forward without coercion, without manipulation, without the sway of just rhetoric or lobbying or status getting in the way. That we are able to strive for equality in our role that we can play. Okay, the third principle is that of publicity. By publicity, what we mean is, these are, of course, public issues. And we come together in public to be able to deliberate together, to consider all the different ways we feel about that issue, experience that issue. And we, as a result, need to be able to translate my particular private interests and way of seeing the world into a public language that could be potentially influential or persuasive for somebody who doesn't have that same experience, right? So I can't come in and say, well, I want this river to go this way or this highway to be here because it'll bring me money. I have to make an argument that you would understand even if it doesn't affect your life in the same way. So that's the publicness of the language we have to find. It's also public insofar as I have to think of myself as a citizen, actually. I have to know that I only have part of the picture. I only see this much. And I have to also consider other ways, other experiences that are in this room to be able to make this decision together. And finally, key, what's also public or civic about this, and so different than many other processes we have, is that we commit to being able to find a mutually agreeable decision. Because deliberation isn't just discussion, it's always trying to find a decision together in light of being able to consider all the different views on that issue. So we commit to something public, the idea that we're looking in for what's best for us, right? Not just me, but what's best for us in deliberation through this work. And finally, we have the principle of reasonableness. So deliberation has been brought into practice where it exists, where people as citizens are able to be brought together like this, to be free, to be equal, to be included, because it's trying to use reason to check power. We're trying to get away from lobbying and money having the influence it does, from status, from rhetoric, from someone being oh so good with words or known by like that kind of influence. So it's trying to control for that and put our reasons, being swayed by good reasons, at the heart of what ends up making us decide, right? How can we create structure and counter to allow that to happen? But being reasonable doesn't mean just being temperate or good-natured or oh so, calm. It can be hot, it can be unfriendly, like we can not like each other, but there's something about the dispositions it calls for that have to be reasonable. And those dispositions to be reasonable are to seek agreement, even if it means hot and hard disagreement along the way, that we have an eye for maybe hopefully coming to agreement. Second, it means having an open mind along that way, that it's reasonable for me to try to entertain what I don't already hear, what's not already recognizable, as a way to get to that place. And third, that we have to be able to open ourselves not just to other views, but also critiques, right? Like we also have to be accountable, give a good account. That's reasonable. So we have to be able to create these spaces to exchange reasons, to meaningfully hear the reasons of others, to meaningfully translate our reasons, so that we can put those together and see what comes as a result of that. That's the heart of a deliberative process. These are the 4 key norms that make that possible. So as I said, being civic doesn't mean being civil. It can look like a lot of things, but as long as we have these 4 principles, so it can actually be hard-edged, it can be difficult, incredibly difficult, difference is difficult. But ultimately, if we have these 4 norms, we will end up with some kind of process that allows us to bring our differences to bear on joint issues that affect us all and affect us differently. No way. Okay, I have very much more to say, but I won't be able to say it. Hopefully Max will just have to catch up. You can cover all my bases. 18, was that 18 minutes? So I just wanted to connect. So my colleague Crucial Whakarae up in Massey, Albany, has been working with me over the years to say, well, what does it mean? Like this is largely a Western way of thinking about coming to bring our differences to bear on joint issues. Right? It's practiced all over the world, but the way we think about it is often through a Western frame. And so we've been trying to think about what does it mean to be in this place? What does it mean to translate here, or not even translate? What are the counterparts? What are the things that might be connected here from a Te Ao and Tikanga Maori perspective? And one of the things that comes up is the relationship between mana and manakitanga. So being very much in the word together, that my mana, my honor, my dignity, is contingent on also obligations of lifting the mana of others. So there's a reciprocity and a humility and a need to listen as much as speak. In fact, korero is often gauged, the quality of it, not just on being such a good orator, as so often happens in the West, but also on your capacity to show us that you are listening to what you hear and you are integrating that in particular ways. Also connected is the notion of po, as in poferi, to bring our differences, come to the dark between us, and from that to allow mana, or the light, to emerge. Care for the difference and the unknown between us, to see what might emerge if we bring our differences together. And this is something I'm really interested in seeing developing, exploring more. So the last thing I'll say then, because I won't be able to get to some of these cool examples, although hopefully I'll get a chance later to give you a sense of the concrete examples that are out there in the world. But I'll just say why these principles, why deliberation. And I love to come to this allegory that's often told in many iterations here, Gary Larson telling it, but I come to the Sufi version told by Rumi, which is 4 men walk into a dark room, and in it is an elephant, and they've never seen an elephant in their lives. And one of them comes to the ear and says, oh, it's a fan. And one of them comes to the foot and goes, no, it's a pillar. And one of them comes to the trunk and says, no, it's a hose. I think something like that. What is it? And one of them comes to the top and he says, oh, it's a throne, onto the back. Every one of them taken in isolation is wrong. But when we pool those differences, when we bring together those partial perspectives, we enlarge our mentality, we enlarge our view. And so we ultimately do come to more informed, better, more just, and I'm not just saying this shows to be true, more powerful decisions, more effective once they hit the ground, because we are better than our first thought. We are wiser, we come to different decisions different things even we want, let alone what we want for us, if we're able to refine our view hearing from others. The other thing I'll say too, just very finally, is it's not just about informed, considered decisions, though that is true. These also are key for governments getting a sense of legitimacy around the decisions that they put forward. So often deliberation is brought in when there's like claims of corruption or like systemic issues, like electoral issues or healthcare reform needed. Deliberation allows us to create decisions that even if I don't agree with a final say, I feel like the process has been fair. I feel like I've had my say. I was given a fair due. And that's a powerful thing in deeply divided societies where there's impasse, where there's polarization, where issues are hot. Even where they're complex, deliberation proves to be incredibly effective at getting us places we never would anticipate. So I'll just leave us there for now. Anyway, so.
And we'll take questions and comments, and I know there's people in the audience that are using these kind of procedures at working to bring our community together. I'd love to hear what your comments are about these things as well, and maybe some examples of your experience. So, thank you. Max?
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui, ko Max Rashbrook toku ingoa, no Te Whanganui Atara ahau, ko Richmond, ko Hursthouse, ko Atkinson toku iwi. Welcome everyone, thank you very much for coming, it's lovely to see you all here. It's always a pleasure to be speaking on these subjects, and thank you Emily for such a wonderful introduction to the subject. I've got a much easier task in a way, which is sort of to take the sort of wonderful framework that Emily started us off with and talk about what are some of the ways that you can make it real, that you can actually deliver some of these things on the ground, as it were. So I thought I'd sort of split my talk into a couple of fives. Five sort of practical forums where we can do this kind of deliberative democratic work that have been used around the world, and five sort of reframings of some of the common objections that are often put up against these kinds of ways of working. So there's five kind of forms in which these sorts of deliberative processes have been used around the world. And before I do this, I want to acknowledge, there'll be a lot of expertise in the room. Some of you will be working on projects like this already. Some of you will have your own knowledge, and I look forward to that coming out in the questions. Anyway, so the first form that I want to talk about is the Citizens' Assembly. Many of you will be familiar with this concept. For those of you who aren't, the idea is that you get a group of citizens together, say 100 people, 50 people, selected by a polling company or someone like that to be representative of the whole country. You bring them together over a period of weekends or a week. Say you pay people for their time if need be, or at least cover their expenses. And in the time that they have together, the people in the Citizens' Assembly who are being asked to discuss some issue of great public importance, they are given training in how to do this kind of deliberative work that Emily's talked about, because as anyone who's spent even a moderate amount of time on the internet knows, this is not an ability that people are inherently born with. It's not a God-given aptitude that people have. So they get training in how to do that kind of work. They get put in front of experts and the evidence. And one of the reasons I like these kinds of processes is they're not anti-expertise. In fact, they're about recognising that there is subject matter expertise, as there would be, say, in how one might seek to achieve some of the SDGs, but people are also experts in their own lives. So it's about getting the best possible combination of those two kinds of expertise together in one room. The people in the Citizens' Assembly then get time to deliberate deeply with each other and then produce a series of recommendations which hopefully have consensus support amongst the people in the Citizens' Assembly. So that's one kind of model, and the Citizens' Assembly has huge appeal, I think, because it does offer a way to find something that is representative of what the whole country the decision the whole country would come to if they could discuss issues under these kinds of perfect conditions, and they the evidence is that they have very high quality discussion goes on in them, and they're very good at discovering what kinds of trade-offs the public might want. And so I think there's a lot of issues again in the SDGs where these could feasibly be applied. And of course how the public wants us to address climate change I think would be a classic example. In fact, there is lots of talk around the world about climate-based citizens' assemblies, and they're starting to become a reality. So that's one kind of forum where these things can become a reality. Another one goes by the slightly unlovely name of participatory budgeting. Crudely speaking, a local body, a local council puts up, say, 10% of its infrastructure budget to be decided by a direct public vote. But it's not a crude referendum-style tick-box sort of vote. The way it works is that council officials really start building things from the bottom up. So they go literally neighbourhood by neighbourhood, and they have meetings with people in their town halls, on basketball courts, wherever. And they say to people, this money is up for grabs. And so you as a neighbourhood, you have to decide, do you want it spent on a new health centre, or would you rather have improvements to street lighting or improvements to a local public park? You have to make that trade-off. And those decisions that are made in those town halls are then sort of aggregated up to ward level and then to the city level. There's a big public vote in crude terms. And so in that sense, the public directly allocates how that money is spent. So you have this incredible deep responsiveness to how people actually want their tax dollars, their rates dollars to be spent. That's possibly less relevant to things like sustainable development goals, so I won't dwell on that. But I do really like that. I think that's got a lot of potential because it's a way to get people deliberating, discussing issues, but it involves thousands, potentially tens of thousands of people. Cities that use this overseas get tens of thousands of people involved, so much greater participation than a citizens' assembly allows. A third possible form that I quite like, you could sort of call devolved planning, and I talk about this a bit in my book, Government for the Public Good. And actually, and I've also mentioned this in an opinion piece that I had in the DOM this morning. And I sort of used the example of Seattle, which in the 80s it had an experience that would be familiar to a lot of New Zealanders and a lot of New Zealand politicians, where they were trying to get greater densification. They're trying to build up, not out, and it got very badly sunk as a plan by a lot of NIMBYism. And so then in the 90s, when they came back to the issue, what they did instead was they basically hired a lot of people to be community organisers initially, to go out there, work one-to-one with communities, rebuild relationships of trust between the council and the communities. They then handed down some funding to those communities, and they said, you're a community where we know there needs to be intensification of housing. Here's some money, you go away and you design the plan for how this should happen. And we'll give you all the tools, we'll give you budgeting tools, we'll give you access to geographical indicators, we'll give you access to all sorts of projections about mobility and population, all the rest of it. You go away and do that work. And here's some money to do it. And if you can prove that you've actually gone and talked to everyone in your community, not just usual suspects, we'll give you a bit more money, but only if you can actually prove you've done that. These communities came up with these plans. They were then tested in their community. They held sort of alternatives fairs. They were mailed to all residents. They then got pushed up to the city council for the city council to sort of run their expert eye over them. And what came out of all of that was a set of urban development plans for all those neighbourhoods that together, aggregated, added up to the intensification of housing that the council had wanted in the first place. But because they had been designed by those communities, it was densification that they owned. It was actually something that was acceptable to the local community, and which, in fact, became a reality. So that's another model that I really like, although again, fractionally less relevant to things like the SDGs. A fourth sort of possible forum is called a national policy convention. Something that's used in Brazil quite a bit, although it's not in other respects a democratic exemplar. Exactly. But what they do there is they have a process whereby civil society, by and large, to some extent government, can nominate an issue that they think is of major public importance. They then hold meetings on it around the country in sort of every kind of major town and city. And these meetings are open to anyone. Anyone can come and speak, albeit quite briefly, because that's reality if you've got a lot of people participating. The discussions in the cities are then drawn together. Those meetings elect delegates, and again, a bit like participatory budgeting, it goes up the next level. You repeat, you have a statewide discussion, bringing together all those discussions at city level. That in turn elects delegates to a national policy conference, effectively, which again further aggregates all the discussions and produces a report. And those reports have had real weight in Brazil. They've led to significant changes about protections for women fleeing domestic abuse, for instance. And so, and they get some of these policy conventions in Brazil attract 600,000 people, and that can be just for one of them. Okay, and Brazil's a big country, but still, that's a lot. And so you're really genuinely getting a vast number of people directly engaged in a public policy conversation that has some real weight at the end of it. And the fifth sort of forum I'd like to briefly touch on, obviously all these ones I've been talking about, as Emily said, they're kanohi ki te kanohi, they're face-to-face, but we do live in an online world. And so a number of governments are making much greater use of not sort of crude, online survey tools, which are still just the individual, kind of like voting, kind of like referenda style things. But in my book, I make quite a lot of use of the example of Taiwan, which had Uber arrive on its shores and sort of reacted instantly by using this online sort of consensus forming software called Polis, which in a very crude sense sort of groups people according to their sort of response to an initial question, and then in those groups people are encouraged to put forward ideas. Those ideas get knocked back and then refined if they don't get widespread support, and so there's a process of discussion and refining. And what came out of that in the Taiwan example was 7 recommendations that had widespread support from the consultation for how people wanted Uber regulated. Those recommendations were then put to Uber in a meeting with Taiwanese government officials, which, and this is a bit I really like, they didn't hold behind closed doors. They, in full public view, they live streamed it and then transcribed it for people to read afterwards. And faced with something that Uber really knew had massive public support, which they couldn't dismiss as politicians are out of touch with them or whatever, they basically caved in on 6 out of the 7 recommendations immediately. So a really great example of how government, how these deliberative processes can be modern, can be agile, can be nimble. So there's all these ways that we can make these things reality. But whenever I talk about these things, I do always get a bit of pushback. And there's a lot of, I think, preconceived ideas people have about why these forums wouldn't or shouldn't work. And I just wanted to briefly mention 5 of these sort of myths and kind of reframe them in a positive way. The first counter-argument I always get is people aren't smart enough, people don't know enough. But the evidence from hundreds of citizens' assemblies and participatory budgeting processes worldwide is that people are more than capable of grappling with really complex issues. I mean, you look at these forums, the quality of the discussion, people's intelligence is incredible. People get really engaged even on issues that even I, think are possibly slightly dull, like constitutional reform or electoral reform. People are amazing, and so I would reframe to say the problem is not with people as citizens. The problem is with the democratic forums in which we have been asking them to do their work in the past. So vox pop people on the street, yeah, of course they say stupid things. Put them in a really great citizens' assembly, they do amazing things. So the problem is not people, it's the forums. First reframing. Second one I often get is, well, people don't want to. And I get this from government officials. We can't even get people to submit on our long-term plan. Why would they turn up for this? Again, the evidence, you have like tens of thousands of people doing participatory budgeting, hundreds of thousands of people in national policy conventions. When people think their input will be meaningful, they are more than happy to take part. Again, the problem is not people's energy, the problem is the things we currently offer them. Third thing I sometimes get is people won't change their minds. People won't be able to do that deliberative work. People are too stuck in their own views. Now, I mean, sort of Roz has kind of hinted at this. I mean, in peace processes, you see incredible things, actually, if you do the things right. and this is also true in citizens' assemblies and things, the quality of listening that people do is amazing. People do shift their opinions. I mean, not universally, of course, but in general, they do shift their views in line with better arguments, in line with the facts. When they're in the room with other people, particularly when they see face-to-face the people that they would otherwise have disagreed with, people's ability to let go of their positions is really extraordinary. So I would say, again, rather than saying people won't change, we should say in the right environment, if you relax people, then they will relax their hold on their entrenched positions. Fourth thing that I sometimes get coming back at me as well, this is all very well, but it's never going to happen because politicians won't give up the power they currently hold. And that is a reasonable point, but firstly, a lot of these things have already happened in other countries, so it clearly is possible. And there is really good evidence that when people are engaged in these kinds of processes, they come out of them with much greater trust in politicians, in government in general, and the specific policy at hand. Because they've seen people up close, they've seen politicians, they realise that they're mostly trying to do the right thing, they've been involved in creating policy, they've seen how it works, they're much more likely to trust it. So I would reframe that to say, if we make the offer clear to politicians and we make the long-term benefits clear to them, then they will come along for the ride. The fifth thing I sometimes get is that, oh, well, this is all very well, but nothing much will change. You can do these processes, nothing will change. Well, in Brazil, participatory budgeting allocates millions and millions of dollars. In Canada, a citizens' assembly has basically provided the cornerstone of their national action plan on tackling mental health. These things they are real, they are used in other countries, they do have weight. They do probably always exist at the behest of politicians because Parliament fundamentally is sovereign, but they acquire enormous social power and weight to the point where in some countries no sane politician would ever challenge them. So I think these ideas are not just good theories, they are practical realities. I think we could absolutely implement them in New Zealand. I do think, and Emily's hinted at this, these are all obviously Western models, and that doesn't make them bad in themselves, but it means in the New Zealand context, in the Aotearoa context, they're only half the story. And I certainly feel I'm on a learning journey about all of this. I feel there's a big piece of work to figure out how we take these things and we make them genuinely authentic, make them genuinely indigenous to New Zealand, and that's the big challenge ahead.
Thank you, Max, and to Emily, that's wonderful. And now I'm very honoured to introduce Kura Moeahu. He is our Tumu Whakarae, which is the principal cultural advisor at Parliament. And perhaps, Kura, you can give us the other half of the story that we're lacking in our Western model. So
I'll try to.
I'm looking forward to hear how you can help us to forge bonds of agreement between diverse peoples. Thank you.
Ara tuata I kawana ki koutou ko ai tēnei uri atua ki nei mu te aroaro o koutou. O tino rai hoa, tēnā rā koe he wāroa I tatuatura I tēnei I tatuatura I tēnei e mahi tāuatahi ki roto I tērā atu taho o te whare miere, o te whare o ngā raiona, o te anō rā ko ai tēnei. He uri tēnei o ngā iwi e waru o Taranaki. Koe rā I te tao tōku pāpā, I te tao tōku māma. Ko poke atua te maunga ko waiwhetu te awa, ara ko waiwhetu tōku marae, ko ara hanui ki te tangata. Ko wai au, ko kura tino ātāhu a Moeahu, kia ora. O te anō rā mihi atu ki ngā kai kōrua mui au kia kura, nei rā te mihi atu rā ki a koe. Firstly, I just spotted an old work colleague in the back there, and it's great to see you. And I'd like to acknowledge you first for coming here, and no doubt we all have a different diverse backgrounds in terms of where we've come from. And I can't talk too much about the Westminster process in terms of how we do things in Parliament, but there are a couple of things that I've observed in attending a number of kaupapa Māori hui. And Has anyone been to a kaupapa Māori hui? Anyone? Yeah, they can be quite exciting and challenging, eh? And as they say, the best politics is iwi politics, because why you're dealing with your own. But when looking at deliberating, it's always great to understand what lens you are looking through. What lens you are looking through, and trying to understand the playing field that you're on. And Emily raised an issue about flags, and there was a debate over 4 or 5 flags, but people forget that in 1835 there was a flag already put forward, and why was not that, you know? And so what happened to that flag when the treaty was? So it's good to understand your playing field. And if I can just give you a classic example in terms, just for an interview, that Māori find it uncomfortable. I can't talk about Pacific Islanders or other nations, but Māori do find it uncomfortable talking about themselves in public, in an interview. It's hard to, because in the concept of Te Ao Māori, I and we is different. Is different. So it's when you're going into an interview, when I talk to some of our young rangatahi when they're preparing themselves, they understand the playing field you're going into. When you're going into an interview, I roti te ao Pākehā, understand that playing field. Understand the playing field so that you need to learn how to talk yourself up. However, if you're talking on the marae, learn how to talk yourself down and talk others up. And so there's a saying that was shared with me by Sunny Waru, a kaumātua, and it goes something like this: the more you put yourself on a pedestal, the more your people kick you in the guts. Yeah? And the more the people, the more you put others on a pedestal, the more your people will uplift you. And in Te Ao Māori, that's so true. The ability to humble oneself in an environment is always challenging. And I just want to, we talked about how do you respect differences. And there's a saying in Te Ao Māori when we actually open up huis. In fact, this is how I actually open up a hui. Can I just ask you to close your eyes, please, for about a minute. Ora he pau toko toko e he nuku he pau toko toko e he rangi. Tuki e, ko te mumu, ko te awha, ko te mani he kaiota. He tene he rau ki runga, he tene he rau ki raro, I whai tā more ki runga, I whai tā more ki raro. Tēnā te pau kātū, ko te pau no rongo ko rongo. Ko rongo te ai o e. Okay, open up your eyes. You're thinking, what the bloody hell was he mumbling about? But the power of kariki in our meetings is that particular kariki is about actually calming your inner self, calming your inner beings. And sometimes at meetings when you get up and speak, your emotions just run away with you. And so that's the first thing in terms of how do you calm a group. There's also a saying, understanding your playing fields in Te Ao Māori, that when people go to a meeting at the marae, they just think, okay, it's in the meeting house. In the Māori worldview, there are 2 places on the marae. One is Rongo Maraeroa, and one is Tūmatawinga. Rongo Maraeroa is all the discussions that take place on the inside of the meeting house. Tūmatawinga is the dialogue that takes place outside in the open. And understanding the two actually helps. And a lot of my own, well, in fact, a lot of our people don't understand the differences of Rongo Maraeroa and Tūmatawinga. The place for Rongo Maraeroa allows for dialogue to be open, free and respected. The place of Tūmatawinga is where people start yelling and shouting, and then it turns into battle. And that has happened on a marae. It's actually happened on Parliament this year. And I'll elaborate about that, and how did we diffuse it. So it's understanding the playing fields and understanding what is wānanga. Can anyone tell me, have you heard of the word wānanga? What does it mean to you?
It's very born of deep listening.
Yep, University of deep listening. Wā is a place. Nanga is the ability to dialogue at any place. So a wānanga could be in a university, could be in this room, could be out in the garden there, could be out on the middle of Matu Island at the middle of the night when you're having a discussion. It's a dialogue, wānanga. runanga, and the other thing is to shape that dialogue. And so we go from a wānanga having a dialogue in any place to a runanga to actually now start challenging the processes and thoughts behind it, but with the objective is to reach a resolution that's favourable for everyone. So, and part of the word wānanga and runanga, in te ao Māori, you know, how do you give substance to it? And they use a lot of things known as like whakatauki, proverbs. They take lines out from waiata and associate it to that. And here's one for example. Ko te toho o te rangatira, hei kōrero. The sign of a chief is talk, is discussion, is dialogue. The ability to communicate, the ability to share concepts and ideas. Now, one of the things in terms of about understanding differences in te ao Māori, and I always relate this at every meeting that I open, tō puki amakura nau tōku puki amakura nōku. Your sources of knowledge and information are correct in accordance to the people who gave that to you. My sources of knowledge are correct in accordance to the people who fed me. And then that way, it already, it removes that agreement, say, well, hey, my whakaro is, well, hey, this is my point and I'm going to put this point down. That's your view, not mine. This is my view. And so the concepts that we just had our AGM in the weekend, and they were expecting a fiery AGM, and on the Friday night they rang me up and said, are you able to facilitate the meeting? I thought, oh no, here we go. Yeah. So, but it was about laying tikanga down at the beginning of the meeting. And one of them I laid down was the name of our house is Arohanui ki te tangata, goodwill to all men. So I was able to use our house and remind the people what the name of our house means. And that no matter who will get up, that their voice will be heard, their voice will be respected, and that no one will overshout or overshadow. And it was about managing that and facilitating that. And so it's about understanding the playing field. I'm very familiar in terms of the playing field on a marae and how it operates. And some of the things like the terms we've heard, mana aki, manaki, which means, what does manaki mean? Hospitality. But if we take the word mana aki, it means to empower someone's mana. Aki is to encourage, to empower. So no matter when you get up and you're talking, that I hope that whoever's spoken to you, that they've left you, that they've expressed mana aki to you, that I have left your mana intact when you walk out the door. And so some of the meetings on marae is that they've often adopted a democratic process, and they've forgotten the tikanga of tikanga Māori in processes. I just want to highlight in terms of earlier this year out on the forecourt, we had tauranga moana coming down to object to a settlement between parehauraki, and it really hit the front pages, and tauranga moana came down and they became very volatile. There's a lot of screaming and a lot of shouting. So how do you diffuse something like that? And as I say, understanding the power of wahine in te ao Māori, and that it wouldn't have been right for me to get up and start telling them to sit down, because when you get two males and their testosterone are about as big as their puffed chest, you know, that's of course you're going to have an explosion. But the mana of wahine in our meetings is very pivotal. And so while the Crown and there was a exchange of words between the Crown and tauranga moana, I looked to my wife and just both her and a lady from Tauranga Moana stood right between the middle of us, my wife facing the Crown, the person from Tauranga Moana facing her people, and done the karanga. Now that calmed everything down. And they reminded us, they both reminded us that we're not here for battle, we're here for discussion with the Crown. So the role of wahine in decision-making processes is quite pivotal in how we do that. There were, so that was just one event. If I can take when we look at question time in the House at 2 o'clock every Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, you might often hear members standing up and actually making critical remarks about an individual MP. I've seen very few Māori. There are a couple of times I've actually seen Māori, wero ki te kaupapa e hara i te tangata. And that's one of the things that I think that the House can learn. It's important to challenge the issue, not the individual. Challenge the issue and not the individual. And you do see, and it's not a nice thing when you see individual members of Parliament getting up and creating snarly remarks about members of Parliament. That's not aroha nui ki te tangata. Aroha nui ki te tangata is about keeping the person's mana intact, but you've attacked the kaupapa or the issue that is at hand. And so that's one of the things that we often face on marae when whānau get so emotional, they start pointing the finger at your whānau, it's your fault. And you have to, how do you diffuse that? Hoki mai rā ki te kaupapa, wero ki te kaupapa, e hara i te tangata. So your point is, because you're attacking someone else. And so understanding looking through the lens of what does it look like, understanding your playing field. And so I was at a council meeting over in Wainuiomata when they were looking at some of the names over there, and it became very hostile. And so what my wife and I done, they were looking for a name to put up on the hill, and so we just started a waiata. And the waiata was about this hill Pukeatua. And when everyone calmed down, I actually gave the translation of the waiata. And so that kind of changed everyone's perception that there was a story here before some of the names that they were offered. So it's important understanding or looking at it through the lens. I only see things through a Māori lens because I don't fully understand the democratic process through a parliament lens, even though I've watched it so many times and tried to understand it and things like that. It is a monster. But there are things that I believe that our members of parliament can take. And that the simple quotes, tōpu ki amakura no, tōku ki amakura nōku, that wero ki te kaupapa, e hara i te tangata. And I think when you understand that and respecting when people get up and speak, allow them their time. One of the things on a marae we also do on my marae is that we have this tokotoko kōrero. And whoever has the tokotoko is the only one that should be standing and speaking. And there's no questions because everyone has a viewpoint. And that gets passed around. And so whoever wants to speak, they have to wait for the tokotoko to get to them. Once it's past them, they're going to have to wait until it comes around again. But by then, everyone's kind of got a fair view of understanding that, hey, there seem to be some commonalities what everyone are saying. There are a couple of issues that we probably need to look at. So by the time we get to the end, if you've got about 70 people in the room, they've actually come up with their own solution. And it's a good tikanga to have. It stops people just jumping up and expecting to be heard. Taiwo, e tau ki raro, o ki atu ki te tokotoko kōrero. And so it's a process that we don't use too often, but we should at home. We should be using it because a lot of our whānau have adopted the democratic process. So in closing up, I'd like to just acknowledge in terms of the principle of inclusion or kotahitanga, how do we as a nation move forward. I think there are some things in Te Ao Māori that can work effectively in decision-making process. And one is actually laying down the tikanga of every meeting in terms of the speaking arrangement, who has the right to speak when people speak. And I don't support the idea of point of order. I don't believe in it. I believe everyone has a point to make and everyone should have a voice, rather than people saying point of order, Mr. Chairman. And when you hear each person speaking, that avoids the point of order. And we go back, hey, that's their whakaaro, allow them to say theirs, move on. So there's that. There is, just in terms of kotahitanga, it's about how do we find ideas as how do we sit down together and say what is a fair process, fair and just process that is suitable for both in Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā rānei. And I just want to leave you with this. One of the things that we have done on our marae is we have an iwi justice panel. And it helps to alleviate workloads from the courts, and we deal with petty crime. And we every Wednesdays they meet, and not only do we bring the offender, we bring the victim and their families together, and we don't have the power of a court judge and just say you're going to do this. We actually have the power for them just to sit down and work a way through. We had Judge Beecroft at one of our gatherings, and he found that was the most moving process for him, because whānau do not get the opportunity to speak in a court. And that has been going on our marae for about the last 7 years, and it has expanded nationally onto a lot of marae. And so I think there are solutions in terms for Te Ao Māori. Well, e hara Te Ao Māori, Te Ao Pākehā, I'd like to say Te Ao or Aotearoa, the New Zealand way, that we can actually teach. And it's also, what do you do if you don't, if the majority in the hall actually speak o te reo Māori? Or you go into a meeting and there are a lot of Samoans and you think, oh my gosh, my whole philosophy is in English, or my whole presentation is English. And yet when we look at the translation, it really doesn't do it justice. So understanding the audience is the one thing. So kare te kumero, I hope that's enlightened a little bit in terms of the Māori lens. But there are a lot of examples that could give, that you actually see, that are quite powerful in Parliament. Nō reira, kei ngā rauranga tirama, I te mutunga o taku kōrero. Kia reare mai rā aku, koutou o ngā taringa e. Whakatakoto atura I o kupu, I roto I o koutou whatu manawa e. I ora e, ngā iwi e. And so that's basically acknowledging you for allowing you to open up your ears, and hope that you've taken some concepts into your heart that to make a better nation. Nō reira te nā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa.
So thank you very much, Kura. That was wonderful and very informative and helpful to us. I'll have to watch the video and really hear it again and take it in. What I'd like to do now is say a few brief words about peacekeeping that I've done. And describe the system. It's another alternative to the different ones that other people have been describing. And that my own experience is in something we call council, which is based on Native American principles. And these procedures have many names with every peoples that use them. And it's all around the world, original peoples particularly, and of course the ancient Greek shapers of democracy too use these kind of principles. So our procedure is quite simple. We sit in a circle so that we can see and hear every person, which we've already heard mentioned. And this emphasises that every voice has equal value. It's very different, as already been mentioned, from competitive debate, where we want our arguments to win and to dominate. And it does require, as we've already heard, a shift in conscious mindset in order to step out of that confrontation. So again, one person speaks at a time. Was it tuku, the word used? Yes, so we use a talking object, so only one person speaks at each time. And we ask for the speech, these things might be different in an SDG context, but we ask for that the speech be spontaneous, that it's about the speaker's own experience, it's not their learned concepts or their opinions about others. And we talk from the heart is how we say it. That might be a little fluffy for academics, but that's the words that we use and it works. I'll tell you in a minute how. But at the heart of this process, and this is all important, is very simple listening. We aim for a fresh and open mind of not knowing that puts aside comparison and judgment. It's just being present with the other person, to hearing and experiencing with them what they have to say. And of course there's complete confidentiality of what happens inside the council. And my experience is that when we've heard like this, in that supportive environment, face to face, valued, respected, we're much more open to listen to others. And our understanding expands into a much larger picture. And then concerted action between everybody becomes possible to meet the needs of everyone, and we can all be satisfied with the outcome, though it may not be the outcome, as we've already heard, that we first thought we were wanted when we went into the council. So over 10 years of using this, I've never facilitated or been part of a council that has not produced some healing of differences. And examples are, I was in an organisation that was breaking apart and everybody was very angry. I was lucky enough to have to facilitate council that day, and things just went wild, and I just thought, oh my goodness, I've opened up an extraordinary Pandora's box of everybody getting upset. The process works. They pulled together, and then we finished the mission that we had been given over the next 6 months, and the whole thing was complete. It was just astonishing to be part of that. And then at the 20th anniversary of the genocide of the Muslim Bosnians by the Christian Serbians in Bosnia, the Bosniaks at our council embraced the Serbians at the end, and they planned to work together to create connections between their youth, which were in segregated schools and living areas. They wanted to bring them together so that they would learn to know each other by these means, face to face, and not recreate the horror that the people we were working with had been through. And again, at Auschwitz-Birkenau, Jews and the children of German SS officers embraced after we'd been working with council for a week. And the Israelis and the Palestinians joined together to grieve at each other's religious memorial ceremonies, taking part in each other's religious memorial ceremonies, which was really extraordinary. And then also with homeless people in a drop-in shelter, we eased our isolation and we uncovered our common humanity, and we all felt connected to each other and in a way that they said they hadn't experienced before. So from my experience, that's why I'm pushing it, because it works. But those particular rules will not work everywhere. We have to know our playing field. We have to know our people's background. And I can see forums of New Zealand civil society on the SDGs may do that kind of work, but they need to go further, because the aim would be to bring a clear voice to government and to the New Zealand public on what's needed to achieve the specific targets of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, to attain a sustainable Aotearoa, and any other targets that are not in that particular United Nations global agenda, but are needed in Aotearoa. For example, I haven't got it up on the screen there now, but it was on the advertisement of Target 7 of the Goal 16. Goal 16 is about peace, justice and strong institutions. So it reads, ensure responsive, inclusive, participatory and representative decision making at all levels. This is what our government has committed to. So a citizen forum addressing this target would likely take these people as expert advisors to hear what they had to say, and would shape its recommendation to government and the public on what is needed to achieve inclusive decision making. So that's the sort of forums I would like to put together on these targets, on these goals, so that after a discussion we can give government a mandate, give the public a mandate to act on their own behalf, and government a mandate to act for us on these issues that we care about. So in my view, we can't wait for government to take the lead in this. We must do it ourselves and tell government what is needed. And for me, it is the basis of a flourishing, peaceful democracy. It's how we got women's suffrage and the nuclear-free zone, and it's how we will make lasting, multi-partisan, very important advances on all these things: climate change, poverty, nutrition, gender equality, protection of our soils and waters, multiculturalism, just, and all the other SDGs and wellbeing issues. So I'll invite your questions for our panelists and your comments. Who would like to ask a question or comment on this? Do you need a mic?
I think, if we go back to the Treaty of Waitangi and Article 4 in the Māori version, it talks about the right of religious freedom. So there's an expression there, because the Crown has to take, when they go through the settlement process, they have to take both sides of the Treaty of Waitangi into consideration. So in terms of the expression of religion, I would say it would fall under Article 4 of the Treaty of Waitangi. Yeah.
This is a nice segue to be able to bring in one of the cases that is New Zealand specific that I wasn't able to speak to, and actually Simon Wright is one of the architects of this, with now called the Participation of Public Engagement Projects, pep.org.nz. But speaking of a case that is highly charged, polarized, particularly around religious position as well as other reasons for, would be sort of, say, pro and anti-abortion or pre-birth testing. So again, we can take this as a case where we would say, oh, we have an impasse. There's no way people could come to a decision together. But because it was structured in a very particular deliberative way, they had 500 people on and offline, and they had really massive deliberations to make sure all these views were considered. They found common ground. They found things that they could decide on, people who believe very different fundamental things, born of faith and other reasons. But they all realized through this, and the beauty of this, when we talk about changing our minds, one of the things that this showed is people did adjust. You might fundamentally hold, absolutely, it's not about losing those beliefs, but what you see is best for all. You were able to discover this place in the pole, in the place between the stuff, like that's where the new could emerge if we hear together, we're staying with the differences together. This is a masterful example of this, and also testament to the idea that even if I don't agree with the final position, maybe, I know that the process was legitimate. I feel like it was fair and equal, and we really did hear all these differences together. So even here we have the Nathaniel Bioethics Catholic Bioethics Center saying this was really legitimate. Like the findings of this deliberation, it was nationwide. It's the first policy-based nationwide deliberation in the country, I think. Is that right? A really great example here in Aotearoa of especially like faith-informed, like really differences of faith as well as so many other differences we think we can't really come to common ground around. So they're not prohibitive, and they shouldn't be bracketed. They make who we are, but we can bring those together in really constructive ways that we're often not given opportunities to. I'm going to touch up a bit of that. Simon there is this amazing example locally of this work. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Emily. Okay. Peter?
Peter, do you want to?
Peter Nichols, good to see you. Can I just ask about what one might consider as one of the more pure forms of democracy in terms of Switzerland and how they go about their democratic processes? And just you explore that concept and some of the drawbacks. For example, Switzerland, I think, was one of the last countries to grant women vote. Whether there were any particular drawbacks in that kind of structure.
From a Te Māori lens, in terms of there's a duality, and then from a Te Māori lens, our women had leadership qualities, so and if you look at the Treaty of Waitangi, there were a number of women that signed the treaty as well. And if you look at Mere Mangakahia, she was very instrumental in the women's suffrage petition. So in terms of Te Māori, there were dual roles in leadership and iwi decision-making processes that had to go through, not only just, I think we've kind of been caught in the colonial lens that our mana wahine actually had a lot more power than some of the rangatira that even signed the treaty. And so that's been suppressed over years, and so we are going through the whole process again, that mana wahine is just as important as mana tāne, and it's always been a duality role. And if we look at our karakia, it talks about duality roles and responsibilities. So I think what's happened over the years is that the role of women in terms of Te Māori has kind of been suppressed. Now we're getting, if you look at our leaders today, we're getting a lot more mana wahine leading the way, even including our Prime Minister. And so there was never a concept of women had a right to vote, they always had a say. And the power of women on the marae is actually quite powerful. Very much, I think, with some of the Pacific nations as well, where the alii and processes fall down. So it's understanding the roles within Te Māori. There's always a role for the wahine to play, and there's always a role for the tāne to play.
I think they have actually shown that there were a lot of submissions written by Māori women about 130 years ago in relationship to land and so forth. Yes, they did have a voice.
If I can just pick up on some of the specifics of the Swiss model, I think there's a couple of things about the way that they do democracy which aren't usually appreciated, which I think are quite valuable. They're a highly decentralised country. You have this very powerful local government, I suppose you'd say, at the canton level, whereas New Zealand, we have very weak local government, yet that's the level of government where people's expertise in their own lives is most likely to be relevant, where some of the greatest opportunities for deeper engagement come. This is something I'm only just learning about, but at the highest level they have a remarkable level of sort of consensual decision making and power sharing amongst different parties and arrangements, as I understand it, whereby, say, the presidency almost rotates around figures from different parties. I mean, there's a level of engagement between different forces which we would find hard to grasp here, I think. I think that holds some promise. Conversely, the feature for which the Swiss are most known, perhaps, their direct democracy in the form of referenda, is the form for which I have the least sympathy. And I mean, probably a lot of people feel the same way post the Brexit referendum, but without going into all the whys and wherefores of that, I mean, you've got some questions about how well informed is anyone who's voting in a referendum. I mean, against that, the Swiss seem often highly informed in terms of the discussion that goes on around the referenda. But the big problem I really have is that they're just not deliberative processes, and to come back to the point that Emily was making, the points that Kura was making, they don't really bring people together to discuss things. I'm not sure they're great at bringing to the surface the wisdom of the crowd. And most of all, they don't enable people to make trade-offs. You know, and I think politics in a very real sense, I mean, it's often part of the reason it's quite disappointing, but it is about making trade-offs with other people. It's about saying, well, if you want more of that, you have to have less of this. In a referendum, you don't do that. You know, one year you can say, I want, you know, more spending on this, and the next year in a referendum you can say, I want lower taxes. And so just the fact you're not asking people to really do politics, not really asking them to do trade-offs is one of the great limitations there for me.
Yes.
So they're advocating for deliberation to be a positive thing. Presumably when you're running a country or when you're managing a project, you can't put every decision out to the public vote. Is there some kind of cap where you, or a sort of sum of decisions that you think can be made by individuals? I guess there must be.
Usually these are, speaking of deliberation, usually it's issues that, often if there's a crisis of legitimacy, or say corruption, or deep inefficiency of a government, they'll often turn to these as how you actually get broad support and legitimacy of decision. Or when it's about something that's more like tectonic, like what electoral system should we work through, or what's a big change? How would we inform a big change? And that's often when it's brought in. But the thing is, this can happen. I really love the example you gave of the Justice Councils or something like that. That's sort of like literally every week being able to deliberate together about what the course is. Max really alluded to something crucial here, which is it's not just the fact that we come to better decisions when we are together, but actually, truthfully, nobody making policy actually has the expertise of how it's hitting the ground. And so often we find out how it hits the ground when it's hitting the ground. Like, what an inefficient way to test. And so there's something John Dewey talks about, how the shoemaker, the expert, the one who is like a technician, like brilliant at making shoes, say, as an analogy, never knows how it fits. They'll never have that expertise. You need to be working with the person wearing the shoes. They are an expert. And so it's a different kind of expertise. Like, you can then say, no, it needs to be a little trimmer here, and I don't know how to do that, but you do that. You know, so there's something much more efficient about this kind of decision making if we can actually empower people and also enable people to make have these kinds of opportunities to refine, discern, decide together, change our minds based on new information over time. And they don't have to be grand in terms of like really expensive. If you're talking about something that's possible every week, right, at the level of the marae, and you're talking about that too with a lot of these examples around devolved planning, or there's many ways we can do it. It doesn't have to be grand scale, though it can be. But I would say it's almost like have an informed faith that we make better decisions about things that affect us so differently and are in a complex world. We will come up to better decisions that we actually buy into more when we do it this way. So I don't know, it's almost like, I just think we'll end up in a better place. But yeah, you're right, there's issues of when and where, and it can't be all the time. Yeah, it's demanding.
Yeah, and I guess, and I'd add to that, I mean, if you think about the traditional justification for the representative democracy, mostly to me seems to rest on practicality. I mean, it's absolutely true, modern government is so incredibly complex, it does so many things, the information that's involved is so great that we do have to delegate a lot of decisions to people who are professionally engaged in these questions all the time, to civil servants, to politicians. But if that's really only a practical justification, then it suggests as much as practically possible we as citizens should be deliberating and trying to do these things together. And I talk in my book about sort of liquid government. You know, you can think about this deliberative form of government sort of flowing here, there and everywhere and getting into all the cracks where it's possible. Or you can think about it as being dispersed. So it shouldn't just be, I mean, I talked a lot about the big forums, I guess, you know, the big show-off, big citizen assembly type ones. But absolutely, you know, you have restorative justice, kind of thing. You can have people co-creating the services. So if you're a person with a disability, you get to work with the public servants to say, actually, here's the set of services I need, not just you telling me what I'm going to get. And that's akin to deliberative